Oftentimes, when I'm reading arguments that students have constructed, I come to the end and find myself not quite convinced by what they're arguing. And that often has to do with the evidence that they're using to prove their argument. So here's a strategy to help you choose the most appropriate type of evidence to support your argument. Let's start once again by looking at where the evidence fits into the structure of an argument. In an argument, we start with a thesis, the thing that we're trying to prove, and we break that down into a set of arguments, usually one for each body paragraph, that are the arguments that are going to support that thesis. We reinforce the thesis at the end. For each of those arguments, we'll make at least one claim or point. And sometimes we will break that point down into subpoints or smaller claims that we need to prove in order to prove the point. And all of those require evidence. Every time we make a claim, we need some evidence. So let's take a look at some different types of evidence that we might be able to use. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a good starting place. We could use examples or case studies which illustrate our claim. We could use some facts or statistics to support the claim. We could quote from an eyewitness, or we could paraphrase an eyewitness, somebody whose experience really supports what we're trying to claim. We could find a relevant expert in the field and quote or paraphrase what they have to say. We could search out some research studies where the findings support our claim. Sometimes if something is true in one case, if the case is similar enough to our case, we could say, well, if it's true here, then because of the similarity, it almost also must be true here. And sometimes when one thing happens, it almost always causes another thing. So we could argue, well, because this has happened, then this is likely to happen or is sure to happen as well. So how do we decide among these different types of evidence? Here's 3 simple principles we can use. First is the principle of trustworthiness. Effective evidence is trustworthy in the eyes of your audience. The second is emotional appeal. Effective evidence appeals to your audience's emotions. And the third is rational appeal. Effective evidence appeals to your audience's sense of logic or rationality. Now, making use of these claims and choosing this evidence is going to depend on the particular claim you want to make with the particular audience that you have. So here's a little matrix that can help you make those decisions. If you feel that for this particular claim your audience needs trustworthiness, then you could go for some expert quotes. But of course you have to pick the expert who your audience would find trustworthy or credible. Or some eyewitness quotes, once again from the person your audience or somebody your audience might find trustworthy or credible. Or you could use a case study. If you use a case study to make it trustworthy, you have to include enough detail relevant to the claim to make it trustworthy. There's lots of research in the area of argumentation that shows that it's the level of detail that really makes people find an argument credible. If you feel that your claim for this particular audience requires some emotional appeal, then you can choose a case study that involves a personal story. Here, the research on argumentation shows that people are much more likely to believe, particularly if you're trying to convince somebody to do something rather than just believe something, much more likely to support something and feel that emotional appeal if it's an individual person's story that they can really feel empathy with, rather than statistics that are just much more generalized and impersonal. You could also use an eyewitness quote that includes some kind of emotional response or empathetic response. If you feel that for this claim your audience needs some rational appeal, then facts or statistics will work, finding some research studies or analogical or causal reasoning. So the way this strategy works is you ask yourself 3 simple questions to make use of this matrix and the types of evidence. The first question is, what type of evidence best supports my claim? This is where you match the evidence that's really the closest in need for the claim that you're trying to prove. Second question is, which of the principles is important for this claim with this audience? And the third is then, just as the author, therefore, what types of evidence should I use? If you'd like to see some models of this in action, then go to the video Principles for Choosing Evidence Models.